Well, welcome to this interview with our consultant, our friend, Reverend Susan Nienaber. And we're giving this a little title of The Challenge of Music in the Church Today as we move through a transition time here at PCMK. And some of us from session have been meeting with Susan Nienaber to advise us and consult with us as we go through this time of transition. And so, Susan, welcome. Thank you for your time and your expertise. And so why don't you take a moment to just introduce yourself and tell our congregation a little bit more about yourself, your family, and your journey through in ministry that has uniquely gifted you to help congregations.
Yeah, well, I'd be glad to do that. I'm delighted to be here and to be working with this congregation. I am an ordained United Methodist minister and was ordained in 1986. I tell people, I just saw a t-shirt that said it's weird that I've reached the same age as old people. So I've been in ministry a long time. Most of my ministry, however, was in specialized ministry, and I became a licensed marriage and family therapist, worked at Westminster Presbyterian Church in downtown Minneapolis in their counseling center for many years. And about 30 years ago, started consulting with congregations. I sort of tripped into that by accident and started to get requests for more business. I'm married. I have a son who's 28 years old, and we have a pandemic puppy now. And I tell people that with regard to music ministry, I tell people that I married into a church music family. There's 4 professional church musicians in my husband's immediate family. So it's the family business. And there's lots of interesting conversations over the years about their lives in ministry. I think one of the high points actually of my consulting experience, we were talking about this, Dale, with a couple of your folks, was had the tremendous privilege of getting adopted by the Moravians in North America. I had a great aunt that was Moravian, and Moravians are extraordinarily well known for their music, which is otherworldly. It really transports you, even though it's quite traditional. But the Moravian Music Foundation is one of the best kept secrets in the music world. It's a vast library of resources, and so I've learned a lot over the years from them, as well as my in-laws about music, and also just the consulting practice and how music fits into the life of the congregation.
And where are you, Susan? I don't know if you said in this introduction, but you're in a sweet part of the country there.
Yeah, well, a cold part. I'm in the suburb of Minneapolis, Minnesota, just north of the Twin Cities. We've lived here since my husband grew up in St. Paul, but we've lived here as a family since 1989. It's been a long time.
Fantastic. We have some families from our church that have roots in Minneapolis area. So that great to have you with us by Zoom, at least. Yeah. And so I wanted to ask you, Susan, as we talk about music, you said, yeah, you've had this rich experience, not only in your own life with your husband's family and experiences you've had, and then working with how many congregations now over the years? Hundreds, literally, I'm sure. Hundreds. Music has a very special role, obviously, in the life of a church. Worship typically includes a significant part of the worship experience involves music. And then in terms of staffing and budgets and just the life of the church, music is an important part of any church. So just wondered if you could share for a little bit your experience in working with churches, both the joys of music and then the challenges of the music role in the life of the church.
Yeah. I think one of the joys for me as a consultant working with so many congregations over the years is to see the breadth and variety of music in church. It's really quite stunning how diverse that is. and really how beautiful it is. And I've been thinking a lot about this recently, but there are so many people who have learned about music, been supported and loved by their churches, that went on to these amazing careers in music. You think of people like Whitney Houston, and my son went to college with a young man who's went to Juilliard and is now in Hamilton. And, I know that church was a huge part of his life, and forming him and teaching him about, quality music and developing his voice. And so sometimes we forget, that Christian communities have this way of being together, this way of praising God together, that is so impactful in people's lives. And the high quality that's been done, the high quality of music that's been done in our churches for centuries now. It's just
and it does. It can be transformative or inspirational. We often use that word. And moves us. Nothing like singing a hymn. I know after 18 months of being unable to be together, that first Sunday back, I feel some tears coming just thinking of how it felt to hear the congregation singing again in our sanctuary. Yeah. So music truly has the power to inspire and bring us together and shape young people's lives and comfort us. We have a couple of funerals coming up in our church. Comforts us in times of loss. And the music is just so rich. And yet a lot of churches struggle around music. There can be controversy. There can be challenges in music. And why is that? It's such a beautiful part of our life together, and yet we we struggle sometimes.
I think the thing I've observed over the years, working with such a wide range of congregations, is that each congregation has its personality, style, and culture when it comes to worship and music. And yet I don't think a lot of people, especially if they've been long tenured members of a church, I don't think that they take the time to kind of get up into the balcony, metaphorically speaking, and look down upon sort of their practices, their rituals, their worship experiences, the style of music. And I think until you know that about yourself, until you understand how does our culture influence the particular music choices that we make and the particular style of music. I also think that all churches have a sort of a bandwidth or a continuum. So they have this sort of style and this culture. And as long as music sort of stays within that bandwidth, there can be some edges of experimenting with other forms or styles of music. But as long as it stays in that bandwidth, I think people can embrace it. It becomes part of the identity of the congregation. It says something about who we are and something about our values. So I see issues in a couple of different places. If there's not a good understanding of our culture, personality, and style, and so then we take a misstep and we get way too far, we stray too far out of that bandwidth. I think those are places that can cause conflict. And I think that's, every congregation has its own distress tolerance too, which is part of the culture and personality. So I think it's understanding what that, bandwidth is. I think that's one place where I've seen conflict. The other place where I see a lot of conflict related to music is each of us has our own particular taste in music. And so people come to worship music with usually some pretty clear personal preferences about what I like and what I don't like. And we just can't, I mean, the mission of the church is not to keep everybody happy. That our mission is to make disciples of Jesus Christ in order to transform the world. And so sometimes there can be some competing preferences that come into the mix, and people will forget that it's not about me and about my personal preferences. It's about who we are as a congregation and what God has called us to accomplish together in this particular context. So I see it every year when we gather together as a regional denominational body, because every year music changes in terms of its style, and we try to bring in diverse expressions from our different congregations. And inevitably, some folks are going to go home very unhappy about the about the worship music experience, and other folks will think it's the best thing on the planet. But that's because we have to really be quite diverse from year to year, because we have such diversity in our congregations. But we know that some of the feedback at the end of those gatherings is going to be that that particular style of music was a little too far off the ranch for some folks. So,
and it's that music seems to touch something pretty deep in this human spirit, soul, personality, that I think we react more emotionally to music than we might say to an adult ed topic that we're not, you know, we have this emotional, visceral reaction sometimes to music, both positive and, like you said, so emotions often run high in church life around the music ministry that might not be there with some of the other departments or ministries of the church. And so one of the things you've been helpful with us is you've shared with us the wisdom of taking some time, like we're doing. We had the resignation of a longtime music director who's gone on to a nice new position in a big church in Connecticut. And so it's been a good career move for him. And yet, so now we're taking time to think about who we are and what God is calling us to be. And so have you seen, churches often take some time between, say, pastors and other, there's a tendency sometimes, even with pastor and certainly with music, that let's get that position filled as soon as possible. But you're sharing with us that there's some wisdom in taking some time to reflect, and so that's what we're doing.
Yes. Oh, I think that's very wise, because it's not only about sort of our culture, personality, and style as a congregation, but also what are our values, and how do we want what happens in worship and music to be in alignment with our larger purpose. And those aren't things that we frequently ask ourselves. And those are not questions that we tend to take enough time to reflect on sometimes.
Right. So, like I said, everyone's anxious to get going, but I think we're having a good experience right now. We're, there's music every Sunday, of course, but it's been helpful for us, and we want to invite the congregation through our time together today. We'll make this little interview available for folks, and then we'll invite them to some discussion times to come and share some feedback and so on. One of the things that you've shared with us that is very helpful for us to be thinking about is you've seen in churches kind of a spectrum between ministry-oriented music programs and staff and so on, and performance-oriented programs and staff and so on. And not that one's right and one's wrong necessarily, but we need to be thoughtful about what we and intentional about what we are doing there.
Yep. This is actually a conversation that I've had quite a bit over the years with my in-laws about this, because this is, I think, really key, and it fits into that sense of identity and purpose and culture and personality of a congregation. I think larger congregations and wealthier congregations usually have the resources to be able to hire a lot of, sometimes a lot of extremely gifted, highly professional musicians, either because they have multiple full-time positions or they have paid soloists, or they're able to hire. Westminster was one of those churches. Large, wealthy music director, had a huge budget, could hire members of the Minnesota Orchestra to come in, and so oftentimes in, I think, larger congregations, wealthier congregations, or congregations that are situated in more affluent communities, you'll tend to see a kind of sometimes a performance orientation to music. And a lot of times that's based on the resources. I remember working with a very small congregation one time. I don't know if there were 50 or 60 people, but they had this huge endowment. And so they pretty much hired a professional choir. They didn't really have enough people in the congregation. So they just hired a professional choir. And then I think that there are programs. So it is kind of a continuum, because I think all churches have sort of aspects of it. But I think there's also music ministry programs that are more about spiritual formation, growth and formation, growth and formation of the volunteers who participate in the music program, developing them and their gifts of music, but also developing them as disciples, and focus on this being a ministry small group. So sometimes you'll see the choir will be a small group that will be doing a study together and talking about, how is it with your soul, and the staff is less focused on pulling off an exquisite performance, but more how does this part of what we do and enhance this larger purpose and help people grow in their faith. So I think it's a continuum, and a lot of it is budget driven, frankly.
I think continuum is a good word. It's not a dichotomy. It's not an either or. It's a spectrum of tastes and resources, and but with an emphasis on ministry. At the end of the day, it's got to be about the people, and it's got to be about ministry and about glorifying God and building disciples. I love your language there. That's really helpful. What about that then? Because we are reflecting on, as we are reflecting on this situation we find ourselves in. We do find ourselves in a time of diminished resources to commit to the music program than we've had in the past, for a variety of reasons, some COVID related, and building use rentals are significantly down, and from loss of a preschool and some other long-term tenants in the building, that diminished resources. And then COVID has impacted some other, the contributions and so on somewhat. So yeah, we're in a situation where we definitely have fewer resources to deal with. So can you say a little bit about that? And that doesn't have to be the be all and end all, but it certainly is. In other words, you can have a wonderful, thriving music program. I'm sure you've seen models of music programs that can accomplish a lot on a small budget compared to.
Oh yeah. Yeah, there's no question about that. And as you said that, I was reminded of one of my smallest churches that I oversee in this district. I'm not sure how they hired their pianist. This is a church of about 30 or 40 people. I'm not sure how they got a hold of this pianist, but he has a master's in piano performance. But just has also a real heart for ministry and a flexible style that he could adapt to the culture of this little congregation. But I remember right after they hired him, I visited the church for, I think we were going to have a meeting afterwards about something. And the moment he started to play, I mean, just because of my in-laws, I mean, I knew that this was an extraordinarily talented person who clearly had been well trained. And I went up and talked to him afterwards. He was quite young. And I said, so why did you take this gig? Because I know you're not getting paid much at all. And he was just happy to do it. I mean, we forget how high the job satisfaction is for people who work in churches. We think about diminishing resources, or, we think about other aspects of congregational life. And sometimes we think it wouldn't be desirable, but congregations, people love working for congregations. And sometimes a part-time position fits in really nicely with the other things that people have going on.
Right. And we found that with music and other areas of ministry, and we tend to keep our people a long time. I think you're right. I think people do find it rewarding, and if there's a good fit there, they really become part of the family. This is wonderful, Susan. Let me just check my notes here to see if there's anything else you wanted us to cover. I think we've done a good job of covering some of the topics we wanted to touch on. Wondering, as we maybe start to wrap this up, what are some of the things you would challenge us to be thinking about as a congregation? I like your term shared values. We had a little joke I thought of as, as we ask people about what we're looking for in youth or in youth ministry, music ministry, as we look, what we want to, there's lots of opinions out there.
Yeah.
The little joke is you get a dozen Presbyterians, we say, I'm sure you say it in the Methodist Church, you get a dozen Presbyterians in a room, you've got 13 opinions,
Right.
Everybody has an opinion about things. But beyond that, opinions are fine, but we want to get beyond that to the shared values.
Yeah.
So what can you share with us to encourage us in that process of discovering what are our shared values that we can explore together?
I think one of the most important questions is, what is ultimately most important here related to music ministry at this particular congregation?
And at this point in time. Yeah.
Yes, at this point in time, coming out of the pandemic. And that kind of lifts us above those personal preferences and opinions, as you mentioned. And I do think it is helpful for people to be reminded on a regular basis, where are we going as a congregation? How are we uniquely gifted as a congregation? And what is God wanting to do with us in this particular context? Because I do think that staffing decisions need to be in alignment with the larger direction and purpose of the congregation as well. So I do think that those are important things. I do think as a church is understanding its culture and its personality and style, we do need to ask, do we have a high value on performance and excellence from professional people? Are we, ministry oriented here? Are we open to letting a kid do a solo who has not been part of a children's choir and had private lessons? I mean, what is our kind of our distress tolerance, our bandwidth? Where are we at with that? And so I think, again, taking the time that you're taking to pause and reflect on some of those things, get some feedback from people in the congregation, I think is really important. And I think a staff change also allows a congregation to stretch a little bit. If our bandwidth is here, can we stretch a little bit here and find some new ways to grow as a congregation?
Beautiful. Thank you, Susan. Speaking of inviting the congregation, we'll just, as we wrap up here, just encourage folks, we are going to create a couple of opportunities. Watch your email and when you see this video, but watch your emails from the congregation and an announcement in church. We're going to create some opportunities probably coming up the weekend of March 20th, Sunday, March 20th. And so watch for that. And Susan will lead us in those opportunities over Zoom. And if you need help getting on Zoom, we can help you figure out how to do that. But if you want to participate in this, we'd like to hear from you, the congregation, on these ideas of share values and who are we as a congregation and where is God leading us. So thank you, Susan, for your time. And we'll see you again as we have some small group times together. And again, thank you for the experience God's given you and the skills God has given you to help congregations move through times of transition. So God bless you, and
Thank you.
hope spring comes to Minnesota soon. It's we got some more snow today, so that was kind of
well, I heard 50 by Tuesday, so that would be a welcome relief here.
We had almost 70 on Monday and then snow on Wednesday. So there you go.
Well, it's great to be working with this congregation. I look forward to these small groups.
Terrific. God bless. Thanks, Susan.
Thanks.